This video contains suggestions and resources to help you prepare for the logical reasoning section of the UG Clat 2020 exam. Let's go over the syllabus and skills that you will be tested on. The logical reasoning section of the UG Clat 2020 will include a series of short passages of about 300 words each. The questions in this section will be based on material drawn from sources that include opinion and editorial pieces from newspapers and magazines, and essays on moral philosophy available online and in various books. Some passages will be created specifically for the exam. Examples of source material include books like Ethics in the Real World, 82 Brief Essays on Things That Matter by Peter Singer, as well as articles and editorials like Reverse Gear, taken from The Economist, a leading international newspaper which is also available online. Other examples include History for Health, published by The Telegraph, and Where I Am, an editorial published in the Indian Express. Both The Telegraph and the Indian Express are Indian newspapers, and you can also access these online. This section is meant to test and cultivate your capacity to identify and understand whether a proposition is ultimately true or untrue. You will be expected to understand its constituents. Are the facts presented connected to the argument made? What reasons are there to support or weaken an argument? Are they sufficient? What are the consequences of the kind of reasoning presented in the passage, and so on? Few questions also follow the old format, which is based more on the kind of logic present in puzzles like identifying blood relations and making family trees, number and alphabet series, and so on. These test that aspect of your logical reasoning which requires quick connections to be seen and made in different factual contexts. Each passage will be followed by a series of questions that would typically look like this. How do the patterns of reasoning in the passage compare to various options provided? Which are they most similar to or different from? Which of the provided options most closely resembles, supports, or contradicts the argument set out in the passage? What role does a statement or piece of information in the passage play in relation to an argument? Does it support or weaken the argument? Does it provide an example to support the argument? Does it clarify the argument? Does it demonstrate an inconsistency between the premise and the argument? What is the main point of the passage? What is its conclusion? Which of the provided options is an assumption on which the argument depends? Which is a premise? What possibility or piece of information does the argument in the passage fail to take into account? Now that you're a bit familiar with the kind of questions and formats to expect, it would help to keep in mind a few important points while approaching the questions in the logical reasoning section of the UG Clat 2020. As you can well imagine, arguments are a very important part of studying law. Arguments are usually sets of facts or pieces of evidence called premises, which support a conclusion. These premises and conclusions together form arguments, and arguments are at the heart of the logical reasoning section of the UG Clat 2020. Given this, the first thing you should do when attempting a question in this section of the UG Clat 2020 is to carefully identify the various premises and conclusions in the passage. Once you have done this, you will be better prepared to take on the questions. Now that you have identified the premises and conclusions in the passage, try and determine if there is an overall theme, point, or conclusion to the passage. This is important not only because many questions will ask you to identify these, but also because they will give you a better understanding of the overall tone, theme, and parts of the passage. With this information at hand, you should be able to easily answer questions that ask you to identify the main theme or conclusion of the passage, as well as questions that ask you to identify arguments in support of or against the author's arguments. Some passages may include more than one point of view or more than one set of arguments, some of which may weaken or contradict each other. Identifying and separating these is very important so that you know not only what the main conclusion is, but whether the passage has a main conclusion at all, or if it only presents different points of view. As always, it is very important you read each question carefully before trying to determine what the correct answer is. A question may ask which option weakens the argument in the passage, in which case it is safe to assume that only one of the options weakens the argument in the passage. Or it may ask which option most weakens the argument in the passage, in which case more than one option may weaken the argument in the passage, and it is your job to identify which option weakens the argument the most. Some questions may ask you to assume certain things as true, even when you may otherwise know them to be false, or even if they contradict the information in the passage. In such situations, it is important that you follow the instructions in the question strictly. Remember, the question setters are examining your ability to read and comprehend information and instructions in this section, and not your pre-existing knowledge. The question setters are also interested in understanding how quickly you can adapt to changes in facts, premises, and conclusions, and so it is important that you approach each question without carrying any baggage from the previous questions. When a question asks you what a statement from the passage implies, you are required to do two things. Look at the statement and see what it says explicitly, and also try and determine what it may mean in other contexts, without stating such meanings explicitly. To do this, you will have to apply all the skills that this section requires of you. Not only will you have to comprehend the statement and its parts, you will also have to extend the argument to the various possibilities set out in the options. In such a case, identifying the overall theme or conclusion of the passage, which we talked about a little earlier, is very helpful. The overall theme or principle often provides you a simple summary of the arguments in the passage that can help you extend the statement to the different possibilities set out in the options. Adopting this approach while answering questions in the logical reasoning section of the UG Clat 2020 will help you answer the questions in a manner that proves most effective. To help illustrate the different questions and the way to best approach them, let's go over an example where we can go through the passage together and then examine the rationale for the correct answers. In South Asia, the ruling classes ignore the quotidian at their own peril. Just ask them about onions. This autumn, the humble bulb has challenged titans. The trouble began when unseasonably heavy rains followed drought across the onion-growing belt of north and central India. That not only all but destroyed the crop, the wet caused more than a third of onions in storage to rot. The result is a severe shortage of onions across India, as a result of which prices more than tripled. This hardly threatens famine, something the Green Revolution abolished decades ago by boosting wheat and rice yields. Yet, remove the onion and you struggle to imagine Indian cuisine. It forms the base for curries and biryanis. When a poor Indian has nothing else to eat, at least she has an onion with a chapati or two. In late September, the Indian government slapped a ban on exports of onions. That briefly brought down prices, helping consumers. But it has angered farmers and exporters in Gujarat, Maharashtra, and Karnataka for whom onions are an essential cash crop. In South Asia, a region riven by geopolitical fault lines, there are international implications. Upon hearing of India's export ban, Bangladesh's strongwoman Sheikh Hasina Wajed admonished the Indian government for giving no warning. Her country counts on Indian onions, whose price at one point had risen fivefold in the markets of Dhaka, Bangladesh's capital. The passage we just read has been extracted with edits and revisions from Banyan, Tight Bulb Moment, taken from The Economist. Now that we've reviewed the passage, let's go over some sample questions together. Which of the following forms the premise for the author's argument that a shortage of onions would not cause a famine in India today? Your options are A. India can ban exports of onions, thereby ensuring adequate supply. B. India can always import onions from its neighboring countries. C. Onions are only used for flavor in Indian cuisine and are not the main staple. Or D. There is enough wheat and rice for people to eat in India today because of the Green Revolution. The correct answer is D. Here's the rationale behind it. The correct answer is D. There is enough wheat and rice for people to eat in India today because of the Green Revolution. The author states this towards the beginning of the third paragraph. While each of the other options may be true, the author does not base the conclusion that a shortage of onions would not cause a famine in India today on any of the statements set out in the other options. Therefore, none of A, B, or C can be the correct answer. Which of the following is most likely to be true had heavy rains not followed drought across the onion growing regions of India? Your options are A. Bangladesh would not have needed to import onions from India. B. There would not have been a shortage of onions in India. C. The onion harvest in storage would not have rotted. Or D. The onion crop would not have been destroyed. The correct answer is C. Here is the rationale. The correct answer is C. The onion harvest in storage would not have rotted. We can infer this from the author's statement that the wet caused more than a third of onions in storage to rot. There is nothing in the passage to indicate that Bangladesh would not have needed to import onions from India had the rains not followed the drought, and so A cannot be the correct answer. It was a combination of the heavy rains and the preceding drought that caused a shortage of onions, and not either of these reasons alone, and so B cannot be the correct answer. The onion crop was destroyed by the drought, not the rains, and so D cannot be the correct answer either. Which of the following can we infer from the passage above? Your options are A. Farmers in Gujarat, Maharashtra, and Karnataka do not mind receiving lower prices from the sale of onions to ensure adequate supply of onions in India. B. Farmers in states other than Gujarat, Maharashtra, and Karnataka do not cultivate onions. C. Farmers in Gujarat, Maharashtra, and Karnataka have been forced to cultivate onions because of the policies of the Indian government. Or D. Farmers in Gujarat, Maharashtra, and Karnataka care more about earning money through selling onions than ensuring adequate supply of onions in India. The correct answer is D. Here's the rationale for it. The correct answer is D. Farmers in Gujarat, Maharashtra, and Karnataka care more about earning money through exporting onions than ensuring adequate supply of onions in India. We can infer this because of the author's statement about how the ban on export of onions brought down prices but angered farmers in these states who view onions as an important cash crop. Since option A directly contradicts this statement, A cannot be the correct answer. There is nothing in the passage to support either B or C, and so neither of these can be the correct answer. Which of the following solutions, if employed by the Bangladesh government, would counter the effect of the ban on onion exports by India on the prices of onions in Dhaka's markets? Your options are A. Prohibit onion cultivation in Bangladesh. B. Increase imports of onions from other countries. C. Close the market on alternate days. Or D. None of the above. The correct answer is B. Here is the rationale. The correct answer is B. Increase imports of onions from other countries. The price of onions would reduce with an increase in their supply. Option A would have the opposite effect, that is, it would result in a reduction of supply, and so A cannot be the correct answer. Option C would not affect the supply of or demand for onions either, and so this cannot be the correct answer. Since B is likely to counter the effect of the ban for the reasons discussed, D cannot be the correct answer. Which of the following most accurately expresses the main point of the passage? Your options are A. Onions are not an important crop for either India or Bangladesh. B. The Bangladeshi government habitually opposes India's export policies, and the ban on onion exports is the most recent example of such opposition. C. Adverse weather has affected the availability of onions in India, leading to cascading effects including in neighboring countries. Or D. Onions form a very important part of an India's diet, and in the absence of anything else, an Indian can always eat onions with chapatis. The correct answer is C. Here is the rationale behind it. The correct answer is C. Adverse weather has affected the availability of onions in India, leading to cascading effects, including in neighboring countries. The author discusses the reason for the shortage of onions in India, how the government's ban on exports affected farmers and exporters in India, as well as the impact upon prices of onions in Bangladesh and the reaction of the government of Bangladesh to the ban. Since option C is the only option that addresses all these points, it is the correct answer. Option A contradicts the author's description of how important onions are to an Indian's diet, and so cannot be the correct answer. There is nothing to indicate that the Bangladeshi government habitually opposes India's export policies. The only instance we have is of their opposition to the ban on export of onions, and so B cannot be the correct answer. While D may be true, it only touches upon one of the points the author discusses in the passage, rather than expressing the author's main point, and so D cannot be the correct answer. Before ending this video, here are a few strategies to help you prepare for the logical reasoning section of the UG Clat 2020. These strategies may help you in your preparation and include suggestions and ideas to help you review and practice for the exam. While the logical reasoning section of the UG Clat 2020 is very different from previous year's papers, some questions from the older formats may still be included, such as logic games or syllogisms. It would therefore be a good idea to practice with previous year's papers so that you can pick up some easy marks for such questions. As we saw in the video on legal reasoning, this section of the UG Clat 2020 is closely related to the English language and legal reasoning sections. Given this, it would be a good idea to modify your preparation strategy so that you prepare for these three sections together. Very often, the same or similar sources are used by the question setters for questions in this section as in the English language and legal reasoning sections, such as opinion and editorial pieces from newspapers. Since this is the case, every time you read a newspaper story while preparing for English language, legal reasoning, or even current affairs and general knowledge, try and go through the steps identified previously in this video. What is the main point of the passage? What is the author's stance on a particular issue? What premises does the author offer in support of the conclusion? How would the conclusion differ if the premises were changed? And so on. As with the current affairs and general knowledge section of the UG Clat 2020, this is another section where discussions with a small group of people may help. Try and create different versions of a principle or facts and ask others to determine how they may affect the main argument or outcome of a passage or a question. The more you debate points with others, the greater the variety of arguments and reasoning styles you will encounter, which will help you tremendously with your preparations. The sample questions and model papers released by the Clat Consortium are of course your best source for practice. But there are a number of different sources where you may come across similar questions. In particular, try and see if you want to practice with the free question sets offered on the website of the LSAT or the LNAT. While these may not correspond exactly with the pattern of the UG Clat 2020, they will help you develop the same skills of comprehension, analysis, deduction, and application that the logical reasoning section of the UG Clat 2020 seeks to evaluate. For more information on sample papers, syllabus, or the exam, do visit our website www.consortiumofnlus.ac.in.